This is Michael ASMR. I just thought that a little bit of personal attention would be in order. You know, just sometimes you just get the feeling like you just want to be a little more locked in, a little more relaxed. We have to work on being relaxed, especially in the modern age with all our distractions, all our ADHD, concentration issues, including myself certainly. And so sometimes if we just actively concentrate, we can become more relaxed. And I think that's the power of ASMR. It really just focuses our mind more in on being relaxed. You know, you might just think it's easy to be relaxed, just do nothing. But then our brains get us thinking about our finances, about our relationships, about our health, about the world ending tomorrow. So if we just strip things back at times, in the ASMR world we tend to like looking at attractive content creators with their personal attention. Now I can't quite fulfill that aspect, but I can hopefully fulfill the personal attention side of things. I just thought today a trigger, as they say, for personal attention could just be patting, just little pats, sort of like when we were children and we would just sort of get patted. We all got patted, right? In a legal way, I mean. And so I will just pat you, and accompany with different mouth sounds, I think. And hopefully that locks you into being relaxed. Like I said, we have to work on being relaxed, especially these days. Some nights we just fall asleep, and that's great. But other nights, our brain works like nobody's business. And so on those nights, maybe tonight for you, you need to be channeled in and head patted. Pat, 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 have some slight bruises on your head. Pat, 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 from this patting session. Pat, 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 but you'll be alive. Pat, pat.
Pat, 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 pat. Pat, 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 pat.